Okay, thanks to Jasmin, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lucia. And before I start presenting, thank you also to Anea and team for not only organizing this conference, but specifically for enabling us to join it in a hybrid way, although I would love to be there in person, to meet some of you personally. I really appreciate the opportunity to present some part of an almost finished transformative research project called Urban Xtopia, Open Future Spaces. In doing so, I am representing a team of an interdisciplinary team of students and scientists who have been involved in the last more than 3 years in this project, and that I lead with my colleague Annette Vogt. And yeah, when we started the project, we started it with the notion that a great transformation towards a more sustainable future requires great visions. But then in practice, we often deal with acute problems, and we are working on rather sometimes small and path-dependent solutions instead of allowing ourselves to dream and think big. And we also think that discourses on the future after tomorrow should not be left to so-called experts, but for this we need a democratic discourse and process. And in order for this to happen, we believe that we must train skills in the public, such as envisioning and reflection skills, that we must train and encourage more than we are actually doing now. So for this purpose, we developed the concept of Xtopia, and I will start my presentation with explaining the concept because I think it might be interesting for those of you who are working on, for example, the functions of utopian and dystopian thinking, because this is the third category next to utopia and dystopia in one way. And if some of you attended the first Social Psychology of the Future conference, you might remember my talk on seminars and exhibitions around the topic, the end of human dominance over other species. And this time I picked 2 different topics that we were working on, which is the reinvention of public spaces and the future of work. And I will finish the presentation with some insights in what we are going to publish soon, open access, as a toolbox that can be used in transformative teaching and practice. So to talk about the concept of an Xtopia first. Xtopia have a content site, so they're using the ways or the functions of utopian and dystopian thinking. So it's about radical visions, but the focus on Xtopia is on the ambivalences between these two, because we think that my utopia could be your dystopia and the other way around. And we think that if we start really talking about the ambivalences and so on, this has a high potential for controversy, of course, but also for dialogue and for the participatory processes we are aiming at. So next to the content, Xtopia also have a methodological side. They are supposed to combine these radical visions with adequate formats that give cognitive access to these ideas, but not only cognitive, also emotional access, so to enable people feeling into these visions, or even experimenting and experiencing them in some way. And these methods could come from a wide range, from artistic performances over games, self-experiments, etc. They must irritate and provoke, and they should be interactive and actively engage people. And in our case, they are also there to bring discourses to the public space. So just a brief summary, we always have the combination of ideas, of contents and formats, and this results in an intervention, which is something we call an Xtopia. In the project, we always evaluated these interventions formatively with mixed methods because it was important to us for us to improve them while we were doing them. And the aims are mostly educational. So we are working with the theory of transformative learning of Messiro and colleagues. So the aim is not really to acquire knowledge, it's more about learning processes that go deep into people's perspectives, values, etc. And this is one aim, and another aim is to train specific, Xtopian future skills that we think are important for this kind of participatory and democratic futuring. And one of the most important skills here is fantasy and imagination, and also systemic thinking, thinking in complex systems, and an openness to, or even an embracing of ambivalences, similar to the concept of tolerance of ambiguity. And then there's also skills related to dialogue, to communication, to critique and self-reflection. So when we started the project, that was in April 2020, and that was in the middle of the first COVID-19 lockdown, where even playground were closed to the public, so it was quite difficult to plan public interventions as we were originally intending for. So we had to start differently, and we decided to start with a call to creative action, which also something that we considered a prototyping activity for us to get into working. So we called this call to creative action a place-based experiment, where we invited people to envision their ideal future open spaces, a space that could be playful, an ideal place to regenerate and to celebrate life. And we did that with a flyer that we circulated online and an online gallery that we put up. And we didn't get a lot of contributions at all, which was very frustrating. But then the curator of a future festival at the Opera of Frankfurt in Germany saw our approach, and she was asking if they could use it for their festival. So we adapted it to Frankfurt, and it was circulated in a lot of media in the city of Frankfurt, inviting people, handing in their positive wishes for the future of Frankfurt. And even the biggest newspaper was involved. And what they got was 2 contributions, even though there were small prizes attached to that. And then there was this that we didn't give up, because funny enough, we found out that the German Museum of Architecture, also situated in Frankfurt, was preparing almost the same approach. And then we teamed and went to the pedestrian area in the middle of Frankfurt with a stand that you see on the right, where we invited people to talk about their visions or draw, sketch, etc. And my colleague was there all day long, and what he was hearing from the people was complaints about the status quo, and ideas of what they did not want anymore, like less traffic, less waste, less criminality. But people were not really able to formulate positive visions. And then we found that, okay, the assumption was correct that we might not have enough skills in society to come up with positive, motivating visions for a future after tomorrow. And we found that apparently we needed different methods to facilitate people into these kind of visioning processes. So one of the bigger interventions we were doing was targeted to an eclectic neighborhood in the city of Erfurt, which is in former East Germany, because we had interesting practice partners, and we usually work with practice partners for all the interventions we were doing. And we chose the topic, the future of work, because there's a lot of ambivalences in it, and because unemployment was quite an issue, or is quite an issue in this neighborhood. And we decided to combine it with the 2.5 days workshop, mostly for adolescents, for young adults, and also we aimed at inviting elderly people from this neighborhood. That would finish with spraying people's visions onto a huge gym wall, which was actually supported by the local mayor. So the participants who finally came were mostly children under 14 years of age, so very different than what was expected, but at least most of them stayed for the entire 3 days. And my colleagues tested several methods for envisioning, and there would be a lot to say about that, but to make the story start, what they found was most helpful was the use of mood boards, while talking about different thematic clusters that you can imagine, like a road cafe. And And that was a process that was preparing the selection of motives for the graffiti. So we evaluated first with internal reflections in the team, and as I already said, testing different methods. It seemed like the interaction between language and images was most helpful for this target group, at least for children and younger adolescents, for developing future visions, and also for talking about the potential societal consequences of these visions to bring in the ambivalences and the systemic thinking. We also had interviews, not with the participants, but with a social worker with access to most of these children 1 year later. And actually she said that it was a very positive experience for the children, and she could tell that they were proud of their visions being on this wall in the city. And maybe the use of graffiti was key in reaching the participants who came, but maybe also key of not reaching some of the target groups like the elderly people. But generally, an owner from a restaurant right next to this wall was saying that the neighbors had a big interest in this graffiti, and there was a lot of talking about that shortly after it appeared. And then we also had a small restaurant campaign, also more than 1 year later, where we invited people who would come to this restaurant to answer a few questions on a postcard related to that wall. So that was not people who were participating in the workshop. And they got a free drink with their meal for that. And we got 25 results, 25 postcards back. And for example, when we were asking what thought about the future would awaken in them, we found that more than half of them thought of positive change of their neighborhood, or there were some ambivalences related to digitalization, for example, and others were just more talking about the concepts that they saw. But in general, it seemed to have a positive effect there, and one person said that, at least I hope this image stays because life is so sparse here. So yeah, that was some nice finding for us. And yeah, when we asked about which motives people preferred, it was quite evenly dispersed, except the couple with the heart was the most preferred one. So actually we also worked on the future of love in our project, and this showed that this could be an interesting topic to further dig into also in our kind of research, because this is something that attracts people a lot. So this is already the outlook. We are working, besides scientific publications, we are now working on final products, let's say, in the project. And one is the one you see on the left, which is something I didn't talk about, but we also worked about the future of death, to invite people thinking about the ways we as a society are dealing with dying and with death in the future, and to invite ways of thinking how we could change also that in terms of sustainable development. So we created a world's first legacy configurator, which is something like a ticket disperser that will be in a museum in Germany dealing with the topic of death. And it will have a digital twin that can be used online also in English language. And the other thing that we are working on is a digital toolbox, which contains a construction manual with something like a guidance how to design Xtopian interventions like we were doing, and how to evaluate them, and to pass on experiences. Also the way we discovered was best to develop these kind of concepts. And there will be different tools in the toolbox. One of them will be a detailed explanation of how to use mood boards, because this is what I mentioned before in envisioning processes. We also did a card game that was part of Documenta 15 that invites people to take over the perspective of wild animals in cities, and that we were actually using for workshops where the aim is to envision alternative human nature in the future. And for example, there will also be a guided visualization into the city of the future, which I believe is a really interesting method also for experimental research. We did that in the beginning of our project with ourselves, and we found that this was a very interesting alternative means of finding visions of the future. So if you are interested in any of these tools, just email me and I'll be happy to let you know as soon as we publish them, and they will also be available on our website. So I thank the Robert Bosch Foundation for giving us this wonderful playground, for funding the project, and again, thanks to organizing the conference.